The quiet morning in Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso, was suddenly disrupted by a tense moment in Ibrahim Traoré's office. He was deeply immersed in reviewing documents related to local policy progress when his assistant, Marie, burst into the room, visibly anxious. Her urgency was unusual, causing Traoré to pause and look up from his work. With a tablet in hand, she said, "Mr. President, you need to see this now." Concerned by her tone, Traoré set the report aside and took the device. On the screen was a live broadcast of a press conference happening in the United States. Former President Barack Obama stood at the podium, speaking about global leadership and the transformations required for a better future. But Traoré's attention was immediately drawn to one specific comment. Obama, in front of an international audience, mentioned Burkina Faso and its leader, Ibrahim Traoré, by name. Burkina Faso, Obama said, his voice carrying through the auditorium, is a powerful example of how small nations can lead big transformations under the leadership of Ibrahim Traoré. The country is proving that self-reliance and dignity are not just ideals but achievable realities. Traoré felt his heart stop. The unexpected mention of his name, and the positive praise from a global figure like Obama, was overwhelming. He watched in disbelief as Obama continued to talk about how Traoré had rejected traditional foreign aid and was building a future based on mutual respect and trust in his own people. This public recognition was a moment Traoré had never expected. His leadership, once primarily focused on the well-being of his country, was now acknowledged on the global stage. It was a testament to the growing influence of Burkina Faso under his rule and a reflection of the country's new direction. The live broadcast of Obama's press conference resonated deeply with Ibrahim Traoré, but the former president's words weren't just a compliment to him, they were an acknowledgement of something far larger, the effort of the people of Burkina Faso. As Obama continued his speech, Traoré found himself immersed in the weight of what had been said about his country and his leadership. Obama praised Burkina Faso's path to self-reliance and independence, highlighting how the nation, under Traoré's leadership, had moved away from the traditional dependency on foreign aid. Obama's words echoed the essence of what Traoré had been striving for, creating a sustainable future for his people without reliance on external assistance. In a world where small nations often find themselves caught in the web of foreign influence, Burkina Faso stood as an example of how things could be different. Burkina Faso is showing us all, Obama declared, that nations, no matter their size, can lead with dignity, that they can be self-sufficient and still thrive in a world that often undervalues their potential. The praise was not just directed at Traoré but at the collective spirit of his people, farmers, teachers, students, and workers who were tirelessly contributing to the country's growth. As images of Burkina Faso's projects flashed across the screen, showing children in newly built schools, farmers working reclaimed land, and scientists developing technological solutions, Obama's words felt like an endorsement of a vision that had once been deemed improbable. The country's progress was being recognized on the world stage as a symbol of hope for other nations facing similar struggles. Traoré felt a deep sense of humility mixed with gratitude. This recognition was not just a personal achievement but a moment of global acknowledgement for Burkina Faso's ongoing transformation. The warmth in Obama's voice, coupled with the applause that followed, confirmed what Traoré had long believed: the world was starting to see Africa in a new light. It wasn't about being saved by the West, it was about being respected for what Africa could achieve on its own terms. The praise also came with a challenge. Obama's recognition was a powerful reminder that the world was watching Burkina Faso, and the path forward needed to be solidified with actions that would prove the country's self-sufficiency. Traoré, despite the overwhelming emotions of the moment, knew that this recognition was only the beginning. He wasn't just leading Burkina Faso, he was leading a movement that had the potential to shift the global conversation on sovereignty and independence for Africa. As the broadcast concluded and the applause echoed from the auditorium, Traoré's mind began to race. There was work to be done. He needed to respond, not out of pride or ego, but with a firm message of gratitude for the recognition, and a deeper commitment to the vision of Burkina Faso's future. It was time to show the world that the country's self-reliance wasn't just a possibility, it was a reality being forged every day. In the wake of Barack Obama's powerful remarks, the world's eyes were now firmly fixed on Burkina Faso. As the news spread through social media, it ignited discussions on sovereignty, dignity, and the role of Africa on the global stage. Traoré's leadership, once considered a quiet revolution, was now a subject of intense debate among international leaders, analysts, and ordinary citizens alike. On social media, hashtags like #RespectForAfrica and #LeadershipWithDignity began trending. The statements made by Obama had not just acknowledged Traoré but also underscored the importance of local leadership in shaping a nation's future. For many Africans, it was a call to action. A reminder that Africa could lead its own transformation without relying on foreign powers. In Burkina Faso, the reaction was one of overwhelming pride. People from all walks of life, from students to farmers, felt a surge of optimism. Traoré's efforts had finally received the kind of global recognition that many had long hoped for, yet had never expected. As images of the country's development projects were broadcast around the world, the pride in these achievements resonated deeply within the people of Burkina Faso. Local journalists who had followed Traoré's rise were especially moved. In interviews, they spoke about how his leadership had transformed not only the country's political landscape but also its social fabric. Many journalists acknowledged that while Traoré's leadership was strong, it was the collective efforts of the people, particularly the youth, that had brought about the changes seen in recent years. However, not everyone shared this enthusiasm. International correspondents, especially those from Western countries, expressed skepticism about the sustainability of Burkina Faso's progress. They questioned whether the nation could truly remain self-sufficient, especially given the economic challenges it faced. One French journalist, during an online debate, asked how Burkina Faso planned to implement such ambitious initiatives without the aid it had relied on in the past. These questions, though critical, did little to dampen the overall support for Traoré's leadership. Despite the challenges, many global leaders praised the initiative, expressing admiration for Burkina Faso's growing independence. In Africa, especially in neighboring countries like Mali and Niger, Traoré's leadership was seen as a beacon of hope. It wasn't just about Burkina Faso, it was about all of Africa. The message was clear: Africa was not a continent to be saved, but one to be respected. Traoré's response to the praise was clear. He was not celebrating his own achievements but those of the people who had made this transformation possible. In his speeches, he emphasized that the real power lay with the Burkinabe citizens who had rejected the status quo and embraced change. The Sovereign Future program, which would allow local communities to develop sustainable solutions without external intervention, was not just a political move. It was a reflection of the power that every citizen held to shape their country's future. The next step, Traoré knew, was to use the momentum from this global recognition to implement meaningful change. He wasn't just talking about policy, he was talking about creating a new narrative for Burkina Faso, one that centered on self-reliance, dignity, and respect. And the world, now paying attention, was ready to see what would come next. The day after Barack Obama's speech, the world was still buzzing. The former U.S. president's words had ignited a global conversation about the future of Africa, and particularly the role of nations like Burkina Faso in leading their own transformations. In response to the overwhelming praise, Ibrahim Traoré called a press conference at the presidential palace. His purpose was clear: to solidify the global recognition and transform it into actionable change for the people of Burkina Faso. The room at the presidential palace was filled with local and international journalists. Cameras flashed as Traoré took the stage, dressed in traditional Burkinabe attire, signaling his deep connection to his roots. The symbolism was not lost on the audience. It was a powerful reminder that Traoré's leadership was not just about politics, but about culture, history, and the pride of his people. Traoré began his address calmly but with deep conviction. "Yesterday," he began, "Mr. Barack Obama made comments about our country that left me speechless." The room fell silent, all eyes on the president. Traoré continued, "I didn't expect to hear my name coming out of the mouth of someone as respected as him. What touched me most was not the praise given to me but the recognition of the work of our people. His voice cracked slightly as he spoke of the dedication and resilience of the Burkinabe people, who had persevered in the face of hardship. He then announced the launch of the Sovereign Future Program, a bold initiative designed to empower local communities to develop sustainable solutions to their own problems. This program, he explained, was not about relying on foreign aid but about proving that Burkina Faso could take care of its own future. This is not just politics, he said. It is about dignity, respect, and showing the world that Africa does not need to be saved. Africa needs to be respected. The announcement was met with applause from local journalists, many of whom had covered the country's challenges over the years. However, some international correspondents appeared skeptical. A French reporter raised the question that was on everyone's mind: how would Burkina Faso implement such ambitious projects without external resources? Traoré responded with quiet confidence. Everything we do involves risk, he said. But the biggest risk would be accepting help that compromises our dignity. His words struck a chord with the audience. It wasn't just about economic feasibility, it was about upholding the nation's honor. We are betting on the potential of our people, he continued, and I know they will not disappoint us. The press conference generated a flurry of activity on social media, with hashtags like #RespectForAfrica and #LeadershipWithDignity trending globally. The conversation around Burkina Faso had shifted. No longer was the country viewed solely as a recipient of aid, it was now a leader, showing the world that true leadership comes from within. Behind the scenes, Traoré's team worked diligently to bring the Sovereign Future Program to life. The Ministry of Agriculture began organizing meetings with local leaders to identify areas in greatest need, while Marie, who had coordinated efforts on the ground, visited villages to gather feedback from farmers. The response was overwhelmingly positive. One elderly farmer said, "This is going to change everything. Finally, we will have the chance to farm our own land and feed our families." It was a sentiment that echoed across the country. Traoré's program was more than just a policy, it was a vision for the future. It was about creating a society where every citizen, regardless of their background, had the opportunity to thrive. And as the news of this initiative spread, it became clear that this was just the beginning. The world was watching, and Burkina Faso was ready to show that it could lead not through dependency, but through self-reliance, dignity, and respect. The day after Barack Obama's public acknowledgement of Burkina Faso's progress, Ibrahim Traoré faced a new reality. His name had resonated across the globe, not just as a leader but as a symbol of a new kind of leadership in Africa, one that rejected dependency on foreign aid in favor of self-reliance and respect for sovereignty. Yet, despite the positive attention, Traoré knew that the praise was not merely about him, it was about his country's journey toward building a better future. Burkina Faso's sovereignty was no longer a matter of merely navigating political space, it was about crafting a new identity for the country, one that was proud, independent, and capable of standing on its own. The weight of Obama's words wasn't just a moment of glory for Traoré, it was a challenge. It was a call to action. It was clear that this recognition could not be a one-off occurrence. It had to be leveraged to further the broader goals of the Sovereign Future Program, which Traoré had launched earlier. The Sovereign Future Program was designed to shift the focus from foreign aid to local empowerment. For too long, Burkina Faso had relied on external resources to meet its needs, from humanitarian aid to foreign investments in its natural resources. However, Traoré's vision was clear: Burkina Faso needed to control its destiny. This program was about creating sustainable solutions, driven by the people themselves, without relying on foreign intervention. Traoré was ready to prove that Burkina Faso could prosper by its own means, utilizing the potential of its people and resources. While the international media had been quick to praise the president's leadership, the press conference provided a more personal touch. Traoré's words resonated deeply with the local audience, particularly as he stood in front of them in traditional Burkina clothing. It was a clear visual cue that this was not about modern political grandeur, this was about being grounded in the culture and identity of Burkina Faso. His message was rooted in the values of self-reliance, and he made it clear that this vision was not just about politics. It was about dignity and respect, not just for himself but for every citizen of Burkina Faso. The announcement of the Sovereign Future program was met with enthusiastic applause from local journalists and members of the public. However, international correspondents were more skeptical, questioning how Burkina Faso planned to implement such large-scale initiatives without the resources and external backing that many thought were essential for progress. One French reporter raised a concern: how can Burkina Faso implement these projects without external resources? Isn't it too risky? Traoré's response was measured yet confident: everything we do involves risk. But the biggest risk would be accepting help that compromises our dignity. We are betting on the potential of our people, and I know they will not disappoint us. These words were met with a mixture of admiration and skepticism. While the response from international reporters was hesitant, Traoré's stance was a bold declaration of independence. His message wasn't just about rejecting foreign aid, it was about reclaiming power and using what was available locally to propel the country forward. Behind the scenes, the work began to unfold. The Sovereign Future program required extensive coordination between government ministries and local communities. The Minister of Agriculture, for instance, began meeting with community leaders to identify the areas in greatest need. These grassroots consultations were crucial for ensuring the program was tailored to the unique challenges faced by local communities. Meanwhile, Marie, the social worker coordinating much of the effort, traveled to villages across Burkina Faso, listening to the demands of farmers and community leaders. The people's responses were overwhelmingly positive, with many expressing their excitement about the possibilities that lay ahead. One elderly farmer, after meeting with Marie, remarked, "This is going to change everything. Finally, we will have the chance to farm our own land and feed our families. We will no longer have to depend on outside help." This comment encapsulated the essence of Traoré's vision. It wasn't just about creating policies, it was about transforming lives. It was about allowing the people of Burkina Faso to control their own destinies, without having to rely on foreign powers that had too long dictated the terms of their existence. With the groundwork laid for the Sovereign Future program, Traoré continued to focus on its implementation. The next steps involved solidifying partnerships with local universities to provide training to farmers and workers, ensuring that the program would lead to sustainable, long-term growth. Meanwhile, Marie worked tirelessly to ensure that the families who participated in the program had access to basic resources like water, electricity, and healthcare. The infrastructure needed for such a transformation was immense, but it was a challenge Traoré was ready to take on. The program's early successes began to show signs of real change. From small rural villages to bustling towns, communities began to take ownership of their futures. The country was slowly but surely moving toward a new era, an era of self-sufficiency, dignity, and respect. As these initiatives took root, it was clear that Burkina Faso was no longer the passive recipient of foreign aid, it was a nation determined to build its own future, grounded in the values of independence and mutual respect. The Sovereign Future program was designed as a comprehensive effort to give the people of Burkina Faso control over their own future. However, the program's success would depend on both its implementation and its ability to inspire the public. As more and more citizens participated in the initiative, it became clear that the program was not just a political project, it was a social movement. One of the central tenets of the program was empowering local communities to solve their own problems without relying on foreign interventions. This meant that communities were expected to take an active role in developing solutions that were not only practical but also sustainable. For many Burkinabe citizens, this was an unfamiliar concept. For generations, their livelihoods had been tied to the ebb and flow of international aid. The idea of self-reliance was a powerful one, but it was also a daunting one. It required a complete shift in mindset. A mindset that Traoré was determined to foster in every corner of the country. The first step in implementing the Sovereign Future program was to establish grassroots connections. Community leaders were key to the program's success, as they helped facilitate the transition from external dependency to local empowerment. In rural villages, community leaders worked closely with the Ministry of Agriculture to identify land that could be reclaimed and used for sustainable farming. Local universities partnered with the government to offer technical training to farmers, teaching them modern agricultural techniques that would help increase food production and ensure the long-term viability of their land. This was not just about farming, it was about transforming the way people viewed themselves and their role in society. The program encouraged them to see themselves as stewards of their land, not as recipients of foreign handouts. It was a shift from dependence to empowerment. 1. Of the most impactful aspects of the Sovereign Future program was its focus on women. In many parts of Burkina Faso, women are the backbone of rural communities. They are the primary caretakers, the farmers, and the entrepreneurs. Yet, despite their importance, women have long been excluded from the resources and opportunities that would allow them to thrive. The Sovereign Future program made a concerted effort to change that. Women were given access to education, training, and financial resources that had previously been out of reach. In one village, a woman named Fatou became a symbol of this change. Fatou had spent her life as a subsistence farmer, barely able to feed her children. But through the Sovereign Future program, she was trained in carpentry, enabling her to start her own business. She now taught other women in her community how to make furniture, and her business was thriving. Fatou's success was not just a personal victory. It was a victory for the entire community, as it demonstrated what was possible when women were empowered to take control of their futures. The impact of the Sovereign Future program extended beyond just agriculture and entrepreneurship. The initiative also focused on basic infrastructure, ensuring that rural communities had access to essential services such as clean water, healthcare, and electricity. In areas that had long been neglected by the government, these services were now being provided, improving the quality of life for thousands of families. The program also emphasized education. Traoré understood that a nation could not move forward without an educated populace. Schools were built, and teachers were trained to provide students with the skills they needed to thrive in a modern economy. As the program gained momentum, more and more children were able to attend school, and the next generation was being equipped with the tools necessary to create a more prosperous future. But the road to self-reliance was not without challenges. The program faced resistance from both within Burkina Faso and from external forces. Some local leaders were hesitant to embrace the changes, fearing that the shift from foreign aid to self-sufficiency might leave them vulnerable. International organizations, which had long held a stake in the region, were also skeptical. They questioned whether Burkina Faso's efforts could succeed without the financial backing they provided. Traoré knew that the program would not be easy. But he also knew that true independence came with risks, and that the biggest risk was accepting help that came at the cost of dignity. The Sovereign Future program was about more than just solving immediate problems, it was about changing the mindset of an entire country and showing the world that Africa was capable of leading its own transformation. This was the legacy Traoré wanted to leave behind. One that would inspire other nations across Africa to follow suit. As the Sovereign Future program continued to gain traction in Burkina Faso, the impact of Ibrahim Traoré's leadership reached far beyond the country's borders. The recognition from former U.S. President Barack Obama had triggered not only national pride but also sparked a continent-wide conversation about Africa's role in global leadership. Burkina Faso was becoming a symbol of self-reliance, and Traoré's efforts were now being followed by other African nations who were inspired by his vision. In neighboring Mali, citizens began organizing rallies in support of Burkina Faso's path. Youth groups in Niger formed their own campaigns to push for local solutions to local problems, drawing on the success of Burkina Faso's program. In Guinea, the concept of self-sufficiency started to take root, with grassroots movements advocating for local control over resources and rejecting external intervention. Across the Sahel and beyond, Traoré's leadership became a model for a new wave of African governance, one that emphasized sovereignty, dignity, and local empowerment over dependency. The international community, particularly in Africa, began to see Traoré's leadership not just as an anomaly but as the beginning of a larger shift. The Sovereign Future Program was proof that African nations could tackle their own challenges without being beholden to foreign powers. Local initiatives, whether in agriculture, education, or infrastructure, became increasingly common as countries looked to Burkina Faso's example to chart their own course. But it wasn't just the government officials and activists who were inspired by the changes in Burkina Faso. Ordinary citizens from across Africa began to see themselves differently. Traoré's focus on empowering local communities, particularly women and youth, had inspired a generation of young people to step forward and take control of their futures. In schools, universities, and local villages, the message was clear: Africa had the power to create its own future, and it was time for the people to seize that power. The ripple effect continued as African leaders began to reassess their foreign relations. Many began to question the reliance on foreign aid, realizing that true independence came from the strength of local communities and the resources already available within the continent. Traoré's example was becoming a guiding light for a more unified, self-sufficient Africa. Back in Burkina Faso, the Sovereign Future Program was not just a set of policies but a transformative force that was changing lives on the ground. As the program expanded, its impact began to be felt in even the most remote corners of the country. The heart of this transformation lay in the hands of ordinary citizens. Farmers, teachers, healthcare workers, and community leaders who were taking ownership of their futures and using the resources provided by the program to solve their own problems. In rural villages, the implementation of new agricultural techniques was revolutionizing food production. For decades, farmers had struggled with low yields, often relying on foreign aid to bridge the gap. But now, through the training provided by the Sovereign Future Program, farmers were learning sustainable practices that allowed them to increase productivity without relying on external help. The program's emphasis on local solutions meant that the knowledge and skills to improve agricultural output were being passed down through communities, creating a network of self-sufficient farmers who were less vulnerable to external market forces. One of the most significant aspects of the program was its focus on empowering women. In a small village outside of Ouagadougou, a woman named Fatou had become a local hero. Fatou had struggled for years to provide for her children through subsistence farming, but the Sovereign Future Program had given her the training she needed to learn carpentry. Today, Fatou was not only a skilled carpenter but also the owner of a small business that employed other women in the community. Her success was a testament to the power of local empowerment and the program's ability to unlock the potential of marginalized groups. Fatou's story was one of many. Across Burkina Faso, women were starting businesses, participating in education programs, and taking leadership roles in their communities. The program had not only provided them with financial independence but had also given them a sense of purpose and dignity that had long been denied to them. For these women, the Sovereign Future Program was not just about economic opportunity, it was about social change and gender equality. The program's impact was also felt in education. Schools were built in areas where children had previously walked miles to attend classes, and new teaching materials were introduced that focused on African history and self-reliance. The curriculum emphasized critical thinking and problem-solving, preparing students to become leaders in their communities. The next generation was being equipped not just with academic knowledge but with the skills to address the unique challenges facing their country. As the Sovereign Future Program continued to expand, it became clear that this was more than just an economic initiative, it was a movement that was reshaping Burkina Faso's identity. People no longer saw themselves as victims of circumstance but as active participants in the country's transformation. They were building a future based on dignity, respect, and self-reliance, and they were doing it together. The news of Burkina Faso's transformation through the Sovereign Future Program quickly spread beyond the borders of the country, reaching the ears of global leaders, media outlets, and international organizations. Barack Obama's recognition had put Burkina Faso on the map, but it also brought a wave of scrutiny from various quarters. While many lauded Traoré's bold vision for self-sufficiency, others questioned its viability and the risks associated with moving away from foreign aid. In the United States, Obama's speech sparked a mixed reaction. Some praised the former president for highlighting the positive changes in Africa and for recognizing the leadership of Ibrahim Traoré. Supporters of Obama saw his words as a powerful message of hope for the future of Africa, one that was not dependent on the West but was instead rooted in the continent's own potential. These supporters viewed Traoré as a symbol of a new Africa that was no longer subjugated to external forces but was capable of defining its own path. On the other hand, there were those who saw Traoré's approach as dangerous. Critics, particularly in political and economic circles, argued that Burkina Faso's rejection of foreign aid was a risky move. They questioned whether the country could truly thrive without external assistance and whether the Sovereign Future program could deliver sustainable growth without foreign investment. Some commentators even suggested that Traoré's vision could lead to economic isolation, limiting Burkina Faso's ability to engage with the global economy. Despite these criticisms, the momentum for change in Burkina Faso continued to grow. Within the country, citizens rallied behind Traoré's leadership. The Sovereign Future program was becoming a model for other African nations, and many saw it as a way to break free from the dependency that had defined much of Africa's post-colonial history. International reactions were also mixed. While some European governments expressed concern about Burkina Faso's shift away from foreign aid, others saw it as a bold experiment that could inspire other nations to rethink their relationship with the West. Traoré's stance was gaining traction among African leaders, with many of them publicly supporting the idea that Africa should take control of its own destiny, rather than relying on the West to dictate terms. As the global debate raged on, one thing was clear: the message of respect and self-reliance was resonating across Africa. Burkina Faso had become a beacon of hope, showing that with the right leadership and the determination of its people, a nation could chart its own course, free from the constraints of foreign aid and intervention. As Ibrahim Traoré stood on the stage at a national ceremony in Ouagadougou, looking out at the gathered crowd, he felt a profound sense of pride. The Sovereign Future program was not just an initiative, it was a testament to what Burkina Faso had achieved in such a short time. The people of Burkina Faso had taken their future into their own hands, and the results were already visible. The country was no longer a passive recipient of aid, it was becoming a leader on the African continent, showing the world that true sovereignty came from within. Traoré's leadership had sparked a transformation not just in Burkina Faso but across the continent. Other African nations were looking to Burkina Faso's example and asking themselves whether they, too, could move away from the dependency on foreign aid and take control of their own future. The ripple effect was growing, and the impact of Burkina Faso's shift towards self-reliance was being felt far beyond its borders. For Traoré, this was just the beginning. The road ahead would be challenging, and the risks were high, but he remained resolute in his belief that the future of Africa lay in the hands of its people. The success of the Sovereign Future program had already proven that Africa could build its own future, one that was sustainable, dignified, and independent. As the ceremony drew to a close, Traoré addressed the crowd once more. "We are not just creating policies," he said, his voice strong and filled with conviction. "We are building a new Africa, one that is proud, self-sufficient, and ready to take its place on the global stage." The crowd erupted into applause, a moment of solidarity and hope for the future. Traoré knew that the work was far from over, but he was confident that the path forward would be one of empowerment, dignity, and true independence for all.